Is Xelor good in early game? Guys, today we have a video about Xelor. So I tried several dungeons, tried to do the achievements of several dungeons to see how Xelor behaves now with this new rework. I'm quite impressed on how Xelor it is. It's much better, so let's dive into that. So first of all, I just did the Kardorim dungeon. I just used a normal agility PoE set. I was quite impressed with the normal damage. I think it does not really change much in these levels, in these really early levels, but I was still impressed that I managed to do all the achievements at level 15 with just a PoE set, and honestly it did not seem too much of a struggle. I actually struggled more with some other classes, to be fair. So the Chiverling is actually doing quite some good damage, even without any stacks. So that's a pretty good spell if you guys want to use it. After that I did the Mob Sponge and I also did the Fields dungeon. And for this I was already at level 30 because I tried several times before and was not super good. It's really important for you to have the Dark Ray already at level 30 because you get lifesteal. So once I get to level 30 and even using just a Gobbal set, it was more than enough to actually beat these both dungeons really easily. So as you can see here, I'm using in both dungeons the Lector companion, but initially I actually went with the Killer of Oginak that you'll see in the rest of the video, but I forgot to record these three first dungeons with him, and so because of it I just came back and then I had to use the Lector so I could actually do the achievements. For example, a really huge problem about Xelor is that you do not possess any type of pushback in your kit, so it is really hard to do challenges like, for example, the Mob Sponge that you need to push or pull every single turn. And so without a character that can do that, it can be really tough to do these type of things. Besides that, also for clean hands, you do not possess any type of tools that can help you with clean hands besides the synchro only at level 90. So all the dungeons that add clean hands we did not do because we could just not possibly do it just because of this small detail. And in my opinion, I think they should put the slowdown, the 2 AP spell that you get at level 35. It could be easily indirect damage. It could be one turn poison, the same damage, exactly the same thing, but instead of doing an instant damage, it could do just a poison damage. So in my opinion, that would be so much more useful than what we have now. So just that you can allow the Xelor to actually do some clean hands before you have the synchro. Then for the Royal Gobball dungeon, I also used the Royal Gobball set. It's a set you can get in the early 30s. It's not much better than the regular Gobbal set in terms of intelligence based damage. Actually it provides more strength in relation to intelligence, but still it's a very good set. And it offers way more HP, almost doubling your health. I was issues clearing this dungeon. We completed all achievements except Blitzkrieg, as we didn't have enough damage to burst down the boss. But it was still manageable to achieve all the others. We had to repeat a few times, mainly due to small mistakes, but overall it went smoothly. It was not so hard. Unfortunately, I don't have all of this fight recorded, I only have the ending of this one. But after this I recorded the rest of the dungeons. I highly recommend using flight often, especially to dodge or disengage from enemies. It's a great tool for tight situations and it also grants extra action points if, for example, you have one action point left at the end of your turn. Just use flight and then let your teammates move into your last position or expect an enemy to end up there. Or even with your summon. This way you gain an extra 2 action points. I use this trick almost every turn. It's really so effective, and for challenges that require keeping distance, it's also very useful. Next I did the Kickroach dungeon, which was a bit tricky. It took several attempts, but we managed it in the end. And it was super satisfying because as Xelor I could basically just teleport us from one side of the map to the very center, but you need to know obviously how to play these spells to really make the most of it. And ultimately, Xelor can be highly versatile, but As you see, I stayed with intelligence gear mainly to benefit from the lifesteal abilities. At level 50 you get an additional lifesteal spell, Clock, which is a lifesteal spell, and it allows you to deal more damage and then you can do more no target damage. And once you have this spell, you can also opt for a nerf build. But before that, in my opinion, you really depend on lifesteal, and therefore you are always dependent on the intelligence spells until level 50. After the Kickroach, I did the Boostache fight, which was honestly fairly easy. I used the obstacles in the middle of the battlefield to teleport around and dodge some attacks, or just to go from one side of the map to the other. Overall, it was a very easy fight to complete. It took us some time to finish, but it was easy because I was already leveled, so I had more spells to use. The same was true for the Kickroach. Initially I tried the Kickroach at level 45, but I wasn't managing, so I tried again at level 50. Still wasn't successful, then I had to level up to 60 to get through. And as you can see with other classes, I can often clear content at the same level as the dungeon. Nevertheless, it's far better than it used to be. Before it was nearly impossible to level up a Xelor from early game. Now it's actually doable, which surprised me. So after completing the Boostache, I got my level 60 equipment. I won't go into detail about these items as they will all change, but I used one for strength and another for intelligence. Intelligence is more AoE, while strength is more single target, like I said. So now we have the Bwork dungeon. I tried the strength build because it's more single target focused. You need to defeat the boss quickly. With Clock, you can stack damage over turns, allowing it to build up. You can stack it 3 times and it will increase the base damage by 6 for each stack. This is where my frustration arises. The damage is very low for 4 action points. In the early game it's lacking a bit of damage. In endgame it doesn't seem as bad. The damage output at low levels, however, is really poor. I don't understand why you have to remove action points. I would prefer if it dealt the same or even slightly lower damage with the 3 action points. I really dislike the 4 AP spells without telefrag on the Xelor. I think it disrupts the class mechanics. You lose the fluidity because you have so many spells that do not cost much, or if they cost, they also can generate a telefrag. And so the same goes also for the Dark Ray. I think the spell shouldn't be an area of effect. It doesn't make sense to have an AoE in a line. You need all enemies lined up perfectly. If the alignment isn't exact, it's extremely difficult to make it work. So in my opinion, it should be more flexible. You should collect all telefrags in the field. I think there should be a maximum number of stacks, for instance, between 3 to 6 telefrags on the map. So for example, if the max was 4 and there was 5 telefrags in the battlefield, you would only scale the spell 4 times. This will increase the base damage by 6 for each telefrag. Then you will just apply the damage to a single target. It would work similarly to Clock in Earth, but the fire spell would only accumulate telefrags for that turn. So you would consume all the telefrags in one turn and deal extra damage with Dark Ray. I think this approach would make sense because you could easily apply multiple targets with telefrag using fire spells, especially with Shadowy Beam. The issue is that it's very hard to line up all the enemies and ensure that they have all telefrag effects. So I think it's crucial for Dark Ray to be a viable spell and have this type of effect. But also, let me know in the comments, what do you think? I don't mind if it remains a 4 action point spell if it does this. But with Clock, I honestly don't like it that it costs 4 AP and the damage is relatively low. For example, with the Upper Mage, I can achieve nearly the same damage with a 3 action point spell or even with a 2 action point spell like Elemental Drain. So I'm definitely not a fan of this. Continuing, for this dungeon we had to repeat a few times due to the special challenger because we kept forgetting. But overall we didn't have too much trouble with it. I was also using an Exo AP rune in the gear to replicate what I had during the beta in phase 1 on the new servers. So I'm basically using the setup I had back then with around 50 Exo Vitality and the Gelano with an extra Exo movement point. So we wrapped up the dungeon. It went well because lifesteal allows the Xelor to survive much longer. I think this was a great addition. Then we attempt the Raccooper dungeon. It was fun, but a bit tricky, because we had to avoid being hit by the boss, or we would fail the special challenge. But with the Accomplice, it can block the attack from the boss, and then you summon it again next turn, so it denies a debuff from the boss. And even with Xelor, you can place Raccooper further away. This made it really enjoyable to play this dungeon, because it allows you to be more creative with combos, rather than just straightforward damage. It allows you to think outside of the box. And to finish, we did the Kwakwa dungeon. As I mentioned earlier, we couldn't manage any clean hands achievement, so we just ignored the clean hands objective. Obviously, we had the summon of Oginak, but it wasn't enough. In my opinion, this dungeon is actually the toughest one from level 1 to 50. So because of that, we ignored the clean hands. If Slowdown, for instance, dealt poison damage, we could manage the clean hands achievement with some practice and time, but it would be possible. So we tried a few times, but in the end, without clean hands, it wasn't a particularly difficult dungeon. You still need to be cautious of a few mechanics, but again, the lifesteal of Xelor helps a lot. In this dungeon, I was also playing an AoE build. I went with an intelligence build since there were multiple targets to deal with, so I decided to stick with AoE. In conclusion, my final thoughts are that I enjoyed the new changes on Xelor overall. I think they are quite good. I just feel a few things should be adjusted. First, Dark Ray, as I mentioned, it should collect all telefrags with a maximum stack limit, for example 4, to deal single target damage, and Clock should cost only 3 action points, or 4 if the damage is higher. But please remove the action points reduction, as it doesn't make sense for the Earth build to have this AP reduction. I honestly feel it's a waste of resources, especially in PvM. In the early game I managed to reduce a few action points, but in mid to late game, if your build isn't focused on reducing action points, then AP reduction will be mostly useless. Then the Slowdown. If Slowdown were a poison damage, even for just one turn, it would significantly help with clean hands. Even with the same damage and functionality, you'll still be able to steal action points on your turn, but the damage will be applied on the enemy's turn, for example at the start of their turn. This will be much better because it will make clean hands much easier to achieve, and to wrap things up, it will also be interesting to have a pushback spell on Xelor to help with clean hands and other objectives. For example, a pushback spell where you push and the enemy returns to the previous cell, so you could push the mob, causing them to return to the same cell, or a pushback that pushes 3 or 4 cells, for example, and on many cells you would push, whenever the target hits a wall, enemy or obstacle, they would be teleported symmetrically the same numbers of cells they were pushed. I think that would be very interesting because it would let you, for instance, push back an enemy and have them recoil to the opposite side of that obstacle. So Papino, if you're watching this, please consider it. I think it would be a nice addition to Xelor. It would bring them closer to other classes in terms of PvM. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know in the comments if you have other ideas for the new Xelor. Subscribe, leave a like, and see you next time.